You're not stupid. You study, you highlight, you memorize. You recognize words on the page and nod, thinking, yeah, I know this. But let's be brutally honest. You don't. Not really. You're trapped in a mental optical illusion. Your brain confuses familiarity with true understanding. Imagine standing in front of a locked door. You've seen the key 100 times. You know its color, its shape, even the sound it makes in your pocket. But when you try to open the door, the key doesn't fit. That's what happens every time you sit for an exam or try to solve a real problem. The door stays shut. Recognition isn't comprehension. Here's the pain. You spend hours, days on textbooks, but when it matters, your mind goes blank. You can recite definitions, but ask yourself, can you explain it to a child? To someone who's never heard the words before? Suddenly, you're lost. The frustration isn't because you're lazy or incapable. It's because you were taught to mistake memorization for mastery. Let's make this visual. Picture yourself on a bicycle. You've watched people ride all your life. You can describe the pedals and wheels. But when you climb on, you fall. That's the gap between knowing the names and understanding the motion. Most people never cross it. They live in a fog of semi-knowledge, convinced they get it because the words sound familiar. And here's the real tragedy. The system rewards this. Schools, tests, and even jobs congratulate you for echoing terms. You get the grade, you pass the course, but you never unlock the door. Deep down, you feel the void. The fear that, if pushed, your knowledge would collapse like a house of cards. But you're not alone. This is the default mode. It's what everyone does. The question is, are you satisfied with that? Or do you want to break out of the illusion and actually understand? For real this time. Let's push this further. Think about how you approach any new subject. You skim the material, underline the buzzwords, maybe even make flashcards. You feel productive. But when someone asks you to connect the dots, to explain why something works, not just what it's called, you freeze. That's the moment the illusion shatters. You realize you've been building a mental map with missing roads. You know the landmarks, but you can't travel between them. This isn't just about school. It's about how you learn anything, languages, skills, even relationships. You pick up phrases, gestures, routines, but do you really know how it all fits together? Or are you just repeating patterns you've seen, hoping they'll work? Here's the uncomfortable truth. Most people spend their lives in this shallow pool. They never dive deep enough to touch the bottom, to feel the foundation. They're content to float, as long as they don't drown. But you're here because you want more. You want to swim in the deep end, to actually understand, not just survive. If you want to join the minority who learn to understand, not just to pass, subscribe. The rest of this journey is for you. Here's the shift. Richard Feynman never saw knowledge as a checklist of terms. He saw it as a living, breathing reality, not a museum of labels. Picture a mechanic who knows every car part's name but can't fix an engine. Feynman despised that kind of knowledge. He once told a story about his father pointing to a bird in their backyard. Most kids learned, "That's a robin." But Feynman's father asked, "Do you know what makes it fly? Why does it hop instead of walk?" He explained that knowing the name of something doesn't equal understanding it. You can know every language's word for robin and still know nothing about birds. That's the trap. Feynman's mind worked differently. He craved the mechanism behind the name. To him, memorizing vocabulary was like painting over rust, superficial and guaranteed to fail under pressure. He wanted you to see the gears turning beneath the surface, not just admire the casing. This mindset defined Feynman's entire life. In physics, he refused to just accept equations. He broke them apart, asked why every term existed, and rebuilt them from scratch. When he taught, he forced students to explain ideas without jargon. If you used a fancy word, he'd stop you cold. What does that mean exactly? Explain it so your grandmother understands. But here's the error everyone makes. You think recognition is the same as comprehension. You see a formula, nod, and move on. You read a definition, repeat it, and believe you've mastered the concept. Feynman saw this as intellectual laziness, a failure to engage with reality. Imagine standing at the edge of a forest. Most people label the trees and walk away, convinced they've seen the forest. Feynman walked in, touched the bark, felt the soil, watched how sunlight changed the leaves. That's the lens you need. Don't settle for names. Hunt for the engine beneath. But here's the deeper layer. Feynman's obsession with understanding wasn't just about science, it was about honesty. He believed that fooling yourself, pretending you understand when you don't, is the most dangerous mistake. He'd say, the first principle is that you must not fool yourself, and you are the easiest person to fool. This is the first epiphany. Everything you think you know might just be a label, not real understanding. And until you face this, your learning will always be hollow. So, next time you catch yourself nodding along, ask, could you explain this to a child? Could you rebuild the idea from the ground up without the crutch of memorized terms? If not, you're still standing outside the forest, mistaking the map for the territory. Feynman's lens demands more: relentless curiosity, brutal honesty, and the courage to admit what you don't know. That's the only way to move from illusion to insight. Here's the fatal flaw in the way you were taught to learn. You treat your brain like a storage unit, shoving in facts and names as if you're stacking boxes in a warehouse. But the human brain isn't designed to file and retrieve disconnected labels. It's a living network, more like the branching roots of a tree than neat drawers in a cabinet. Imagine a gardener who tapes leaves onto a bare branch, hoping to fool everyone into thinking the tree is healthy. That's what memorization does. It creates the illusion of knowledge, but the leaves aren't alive. The first strong wind, a tough question, a new context, a week's time, blows them all away. Real learning is when those leaves grow from the branch itself, fed by roots that reach deep into the soil of understanding. Neurologically, this matters. When you simply repeat information, you engage shallow circuits in your brain, short-term memory pathways. These are weak, easily disrupted, and fade quickly. Real learning is when those leaves grow from the branch itself, fed by roots that reach deep into the soil of understanding. Neurologically, this matters. When you simply repeat information, you engage shallow circuits in your brain, short-term memory pathways. These are weak, easily disrupted, and fade quickly. But when you force yourself to reconstruct, to explain, to visualize, you activate deeper, interconnected regions. This is what turns a collection of facts into a mental model, a living, breathing structure you can actually use, adapt, and apply. Here's the error everyone makes. You think recognition is the same as recall. Seeing a familiar word tricks your mind into thinking you understand. But recognition is passive. It's the mental equivalent of seeing a face in a crowd. Recall is active. You must recreate the person's features from memory alone. Only recall builds lasting understanding, because it demands that you rebuild the idea from scratch, using your own mental scaffolding. Feynman called this out relentlessly. He'd say, name doesn't equal knowledge. If you can only repeat the label, you don't own the concept. You're renting it. And rent is due the moment you face a real problem. When you're asked to explain, to solve, to connect, the superficial knowledge collapses. Only what's rooted survives. But here's the deeper trap. The education system rewards the appearance of knowledge. Exams test your ability to regurgitate, not to reason. You get points for the right answer, not for understanding why it's right. This trains you to chase recognition, not mastery. It's like practicing to recognize paintings, but never learning to paint. So next time you're tempted to highlight, underline, or passively reread, remember this. Your brain demands connections, not collections. If you want to keep knowledge, you must integrate it. Make it part of your neural roots, not just a borrowed leaf. That's the only way to stop knowledge from slipping through your fingers. The next time you study, ask yourself, am I taping leaves or growing them? That single question can change the way you learn forever. Here's where almost everyone stumbles. You confuse naming with knowing. You see a diagram labeled mitochondria and think you understand how a cell works. But give yourself a blank page and try to explain it. Suddenly, you freeze. Why? Because recognizing a word is not the same as grasping the engine behind it. Imagine you're handed all the parts of a bicycle: frame, chain, pedals, wheels. If you just memorize their names, could you ride? Of course not. You'd have no sense of how the chain transfers force, how balance is maintained, or why gears matter. Knowing the parts is not knowing the bike. This is the difference between a mechanic and a parrot. The mechanic can build, fix, and explain. The parrot just repeats. Feynman despised this shortcut. He called it cargo cult learning, imitating the surface details, hoping deep understanding will magically appear. But the brain doesn't work that way. Your neurons aren't satisfied with labels, they crave models. Models are mental blueprints, how things interact, not just what they're called. When you only memorize, you're stacking flashcards. When you understand, you're building a mental machine. Here's the principle. Real understanding is the ability to reconstruct from scratch. It's not about recalling names, but about explaining why and how things work. Feynman's test was simple. Can you teach it to a child? Can you break it down so simply that even a beginner can follow? If not, you don't understand it yourself. But here's the mistake everyone makes. You stop at recognition. You believe that because you've seen a term, you own it. This is the cognitive illusion that traps almost everyone. The reality is harsher. True mastery means you can break a concept apart, shuffle the pieces, and rebuild it without crumbling. Think of it like a chef who knows the recipe by heart versus someone who just reads it off a card. The chef can improvise, substitute, and still create the dish. The reader panics if one ingredient is missing. That's the gap between naming and knowing. So, the next time you study, forget the urge to memorize definitions. Instead, ask yourself, if someone erased the textbook, could I recreate the idea from memory? Could I explain it to a child, or even to myself, without jargon? That's the acid test Feynman swore by. It's uncomfortable, it's slow, but it's the only way to ensure the roots of knowledge dig deep. Otherwise, you're just pinning name tags on shadows and calling it learning. The world is full of people who can recite terms but can't solve real problems. Don't be one of them. Build the engine, not just the label. That's the Feynman way. Here's how you tear away the veneer and build real understanding, step by step. Imagine you're not studying for a test, but explaining the concept to a curious child. Strip the jargon. If any part makes you hesitate or reach for the textbook, mark it. That's a weak joint. Expose it. Step 1. Write the idea at the top of a blank page. Not the term. Describe what it is. For example, don't write photosynthesis. Write how plants turn sunlight into food. The difference is massive. Naming is not knowing. Describing is understanding. Step 2. Explain it aloud, in plain language. No hiding behind fancy words. If you can't, you don't understand yet. Push yourself. Ask, but how, after every sentence. Feynman called this chasing the chain of why. It's like peeling an onion, layer by layer, until you reach the core. If you stop at the surface, you've learned nothing. Step 3. Each time you get stuck, go back to the source. Don't gloss over. Dig until you can truly explain it, without bluff. If you can't explain it to a 12-year-old, you're lying to yourself. This is the moment most people quit. They'd rather memorize than admit ignorance. But you're not most people. Step 4. Once you can explain it simply, find the gaps. Where is your explanation fuzzy or circular? Where do you use words you can't define? Circle those. That's your learning map. Each circle is a door to deeper understanding. Don't skip them. Attack them. Step 5. Repeat. As you clarify, your explanation gets shorter, clearer, stronger. You're compressing coal into diamond. The more you refine, the more the concept becomes part of you. It's not about sounding smart, it's about being clear. Visualize it. Most people build their knowledge like a rickety scaffold, all terms and no substance. You're pouring a concrete foundation, solid, unshakable. When the wind of a real problem blows, their scaffold collapses, yours stands. But here's the catch. This isn't fast. It's humbling. You'll realize how little you knew. Most people run from that feeling. The few who face it learn for life. It's the difference between owning a tool and just renting it for a day. Want a shortcut? There isn't one. But there is a lever: teaching. Explain to others. If they don't get it, you haven't mastered it. Feedback is your truth serum. Every question you can't answer is a spotlight on your blind spots. Welcome it. This is the blueprint. Ruthless clarity, relentless honesty. The only way knowledge becomes yours. Feynman didn't care about sounding impressive. He cared about seeing clearly. That's your new standard. Don't settle for less. But here's the trap you'll fall into if you aren't vigilant. Your own mind will fight you. Not because you're weak, but because you're human. Your brain hates the discomfort of exposing ignorance. It prefers the warm blanket of illusion, the easy comfort of thinking you already know enough. Picture this. You're staring at a foggy window. You could grab a cloth and wipe it clean, see the world as it is. But that takes effort, and the fog is comfortable. It lets you pretend you already know what's outside. That's what happens with complex topics. The mind fogs up with jargon and half-remembered definitions. You tell yourself, I get this, just to avoid the awkward moment of realizing you don't. Ego whispers, don't look stupid. Laziness adds, you already know enough. Feynman called this self-deception the most dangerous enemy of learning. He saw Nobel Prize winners fall for it. He saw students ace exams and fail at life. If you let pride dictate your study, you'll always choose recognition over reality. You'll memorize answers, not understand the questions. You'll chase grades, not mastery. The world rewards the appearance of knowledge, not the substance. That's why so many people plateau. They stop at the first layer of understanding, because going deeper means admitting what you don't know. That's painful. It's also necessary. Here's the cruel twist. The more familiar a word or concept feels, the more your brain insists you understand it. This is the illusion of explanatory depth. You don't know how a bicycle works, but you've ridden one. You think you understand gravity, but can you explain it without mumbling equations? Your mind fills gaps with confidence, not comprehension. The more you hear a term, the more you nod along, the less likely you are to question it. That's how mediocrity becomes invisible. You stop noticing the fog. But Feynman's lens was merciless. He didn't care how smart you sounded. He cared about how clearly you could see. He'd ask, can you explain it to a child? Can you draw it? Can you build it from scratch? If not, you don't know it. Period. No exceptions. The only way out is through the discomfort. You have to interrogate your knowledge. Where is it thin? Where is it just a name you memorized, not a principle you own? Where are you hiding behind big words? This is uncomfortable. It's supposed to be. Growth feels like friction. If you don't feel foolish sometimes, you're not learning, just performing. The obstacle isn't the subject, it's your unwillingness to look foolish. Most people would rather protect their ego than upgrade their mind. They'd rather be right than real. That's why the Feynman technique works. It forces you to confront what you don't know. But only if you're willing to drop the act. Most aren't. Are you? Here's the law you can't escape. This isn't just about studying physics or math. It's about how your mind interacts with reality itself. Picture a river cutting through rock. The water doesn't care about the rock's pride or its history. Bit by bit, it erodes the surface because it adapts. It finds the truth of the landscape. Your brain is the river, but only if you let it flow past your own resistance. Most people build dams out of ego and fear. They block the current, hoping to preserve the shape of the rock. But the cost is stagnation. Feynman never limited his approach to textbooks. He applied it to everything. Repairing radios as a kid, deciphering Mayan hieroglyphs, even understanding the quirks of human behavior. He'd ask, "What do I actually know here? Where does my knowledge stop? Where am I bluffing?" This wasn't just a study hack. It was his operating system for thinking. Here's the mistake everyone makes. They compartmentalize learning. This is for exams. That's for work. The rest is life. But your brain doesn't divide experience. The same cognitive shortcuts, the same ego shields pop up everywhere. In arguments, in relationships, in decisions about money or health. If you fake understanding in one area, you'll do it everywhere. It becomes your default mode, superficial, performative, hollow. But here's the epiphany. Once you flip the switch, you see through the illusion everywhere. You begin to spot when you're just reciting labels, not grasping essence. You start to enjoy exposing your own ignorance, because every gap is a doorway. You see how the Feynman mindset isn't just for passing tests. It's for breaking through any stuck pattern. Think about the last time you nodded along in a meeting, or pretended to understand a friend's explanation, or followed a health trend without knowing the science. That's the same mental glitch. It's not isolated, it's systemic. The Feynman technique is a universal solvent for confusion, but only if you let it dissolve your defenses everywhere, not just at your desk. This is the real challenge. Will you use it in every domain, or only when someone's grading you? Because the world is always grading you, just not with a red pen. It's grading you with missed opportunities, shallow relationships, and decisions built on sand. The river always wins, but only if you let it flow. There's a moment, right now, where you decide what kind of mind you want. Most people settle for naming things. They memorize, they recite, they pass. But you've seen what that leads to. The surface cracks the first time you step on it. Feynman's rule is your lever. It's like trading a plastic key for a master key. Suddenly, locked doors don't matter. You stop fearing questions because you've learned to break them down. You're not just collecting words, you're building mental machines, each gear meshing with the next, no piece wasted. Picture your mind as a workshop, not a museum. In a museum, everything is labeled, pristine, dead behind glass. In a workshop, tools are worn, ideas are tested, and nothing survives unless it works. Feynman lived in the workshop. That's where breakthroughs happen, and where you realize understanding isn't a status you reach, it's a process you do. So here's the synthesis. Real learning is the art of relentless simplification. Strip away jargon, demand clarity. Argue with yourself until you can teach a child. That's how you make knowledge behave. That's how you move from echoing information to wielding it. But here's the error everyone makes. They think this is just about passing exams or impressing others. It's not. This is about building a mind that can withstand pressure, adapt, and create. When you understand something deeply, you can reshape it, apply it, and even break it apart to build something new. That's the difference between a parrot and a thinker. Let's be brutally honest. The world doesn't reward people who can recite definitions. It rewards people who can solve problems, connect ideas, and see what others miss. That only happens when you own the knowledge, not when you rent it for a test. Here's your new model. If you can't explain it, you don't own it. If you can't teach it, you don't understand it. If you can't break it down, you're just pretending. The world doesn't care about your grade, it cares about your grasp. Feynman called this the joy of figuring things out. It's not about being right, it's about being real. It's about looking at a problem and saying, I don't know yet, but I can find out. That's the engine of progress. That's how you move from watching life to shaping it. So, if this turned a gear in your mind, imagine what happens when you overhaul the entire engine. This is just the first step. The next mind shift will take you deeper, into the territory where real thinkers live. Subscribe. Not for me, but for the version of yourself that refuses to settle for surface-level answers. The world needs more minds that build, not just name. Be one of them.